mixture of fish, prawns, shellfish, so they've just got mussels today.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, this is it. They're kind of like a lot of the animals in captivity. If they have something in their mind they want, they're kind of going, surely there's something more exciting.
Yeah.
They don't have to work it.
I think they just smelled it and then. So they only ate like seafood.
Yeah, basically. I'm going to attempt to do an otter talk against the background of screaming otters, which is always really helpful.
Yeah.
So these guys, we've got Asian short-clawed otters. Can you all hear me, kind of? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's 13 species of otter worldwide. These are the smallest, possibly the loudest, but that could be just a personal observation. And one of the reasons you see them in so many zoos is they're actually a very social otter. So the otters we get in the UK, the Eurasian otter, are much less sociable. You'll find an adult female with cubs until they grow up, and then she'll kind of boot them out to find their own territories. The male won't live with them at all. These guys are very much a family otter. So you'll get a male-female pairing, and then their offspring will live with them. So you can get groups of maybe up to 20 otters, all living happily together. And that will go on until the adult pair die, and then the youngsters will disperse and find their own mates and territories. So that way they kind of avoid inbreeding, but they do sort of live together. And one of the reasons you find social otters is it's a good way to kind of combat predators. So obviously these guys aren't very big, but you do also see it in things like the giant river otters. They also live in families, and that's because they live in territory where there are things like jaguars. So once you've got a group of otters, they look very cute, but actually they're mustelids. They're quite feisty, quite bitey, and if you've got a whole mob of them, they'll kind of see off quite a lot of things. So we're feeding them mussels today. In the wild, they would largely eat shellfish and crustaceans. Now these guys, as I say, they're an Asian short-clawed otter, so they come from places like India, Myanmar, kind of into China, even in the Philippines. They'll live in kind of freshwater rivers, estuaries, swamps. And in the wild, they would, as I say, eat largely shellfish and crustaceans. And as you can see, when they're feeding today, they use their hands a lot, and it doesn't feel wrong talking about hands with otters, because those are definitely more than paws. And in the wild they would do that. So as you can see, where they're churning up the water, it's quite muddy, and you get that in wild water too. So what they'll do, they'll dive down and they'll do a lot of their hunting by touch. So all otters have got very kind of luxuriant whiskers, so they can pick up vibrations from prey, and these guys will also kind of actively look for it if they're looking for shellfish. So these very sort of dexterous, kind of agile little hands will kind of rummage around until they can, and then when they find something, they'll grab hold of it and take it out to eat it, sort of either on the surface or on the edge of the water. They can dive for up to 5 minutes, which is pretty impressive for something that little. As I say, they're a very well adapted little predator. With most otters, the sense of touch is more important than sight. So certainly with English otters in the UK, the Eurasian otter, there have been records of blind otters still being able to kind of basically catch their own food, because they rely so little on sight when they're hunting. As I say, they've got really thick whiskers. They'll feel the vibrations of prey in the water, and they'll find it easy to track those down. As you can see, they're very well adapted to being in water. They're very streamlined shape, and their coats as well. So they've got a very soft, sort of thick, downy undercoat, but they've got that top layer which keeps the water out. So that keeps them nice and warm. They don't get chilled when they're in the water. So when they come out, they're still basically dry down to their skin. It's just the top layer gets wet. So they're very well insulated. I'm trying to think what else to say about these guys, apart from how awesome they are. Yeah, so I'd say they're very dexterous with their hands, and you'll quite often see them almost practicing. So they like to play with stones or with anything they can find. So one of the things we might do is kind of give them food in puzzle feeders, because then it gives them more to kind of manipulate. Obviously shellfish are great because they can't just go and eat it. They've got to actually get into it. As you can see, they're doing a pretty impressive job there. Now they've finally got over the fact that it's not fish. But yeah, they are ever hopeful, these guys. So they do get fed regularly. They've got quite fast metabolism, so they get fed, I think it's 2 or 3 times a day. But you'll still find whenever you walk past them, the scream will go up, and you'll look and they'll all be kind of, which always makes me laugh. But if anybody's got any questions about otters, as I say, there are 13 species in the world. These are the smallest. We'll probably be a lot less likely to see an otter in the wild in this country, but they are a lot more widespread than they were. Their numbers did drop quite drastically going into like the 70s and that. They were hunted, but I think it was also due to things like pesticide. So numbers in the UK did plummet, but they have come back really nicely as we're starting to take more care of our rivers. And they're a pretty important part of the ecosystem. They're one of the things that will help against invasive species like mink. So you'll very often not find mink on a stretch of otter where there are rivers, where there are mink. These guys will sort of chase them off. And these are a lot more selective in there. So the Eurasian otter is a lot more selective in its hunting than a mink. So a mink will basically hunt everything in that area. And partly because they didn't evolve as part of the ecosystem we have here. So they'll just sort of kind of trash an ecosystem, whereas these guys will hunt particular things, but other things like water voles and waterfowl do very well when there are otters, whereas when there are mink, they're likely to kill those. So yeah, they're an important part of this, not this species, but otters generally are kind of an important part of the British countryside, and one that's definitely making a comeback. So I think they've now been seen in most counties in the UK, which is great. And now they're no longer a hunted species in this country. They also find some areas where they're visible in daytime, because a lot of